Welcome to Nothing is Rushing. Tonight, we're stepping into one of the strangest and most revealing corners of medieval daily life. Behind the pale skin, the plucked hairlines, the herbal rinses, the scented cloth, and the careful grooming was a world of beauty, status, morality, medicine, and quiet human hope. This is the real story of the weirdest medieval beauty habits. Before we begin, just a small reminder. If you would like to find this place again, subscribing and leaving a small like is enough. But if you do nothing right now, that is perfectly fine too. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. I always love seeing listeners joining from all around the world. Now settle in, lower the lights, and let us slowly drift into tonight's journey. If we want to understand the weirdest medieval beauty habits, the first thing we have to do is let go of the easy joke that people in the Middle Ages simply did not care how they looked, because that is not true, and it never really was. Medieval people cared very much about appearance. They noticed skin, hair, smell, posture, clothing, hands, teeth, complexion, and the thousand small details by which one human being decides another looks healthy, respectable, attractive, frightening, pious, rich, poor, careless, or refined. What makes medieval beauty so interesting is not that it was absent, but that it was built from a very different world of materials, beliefs, limits, and expectations. That world could produce habits that seem odd to us now. Some were practical, some were symbolic, some were based on medical ideas that no longer persuade us. Some were shaped by class because beauty rarely remains just beauty for very long. A pale face might suggest status because it implied distance from heavy outdoor labour. Smooth skin could suggest youth, care and privilege. Groomed hair, clean linen, and a controlled body could signal discipline and decency. The ideal face or figure was never only about attraction. It also carried moral and social meaning, which is one reason beauty practices could become surprisingly serious. And because the medieval body lived closer to smoke, rough cloth, stronger smells, harder labour, and limited hygiene than ours does, beauty was often less a polished routine than a negotiation with reality. And then there is the most human part of all. Medieval people were capable of the same hopeful foolishness that beauty inspires today. They wanted better skin, nicer hair, fresher breath, brighter appearance, softer hands, and the visible signs of youth a little longer than time naturally wished to offer them. They listened to advice. They repeated questionable remedies. They trusted tradition. They experimented carefully or unwisely. They believed things about the body that sound bizarre now. Yet beneath the strangeness, the desire itself is perfectly familiar. They wanted to look well. They wanted to be admired. They wanted the face in the mirror, if mirrors were available, to give them some small mercy before the day began. So before we speak of pale skin, plucked hairlines, herbal rinses, scented gloves, strange skin mixtures, breath remedies, bathing customs, and all the other habits that could make medieval beauty feel both fascinating and slightly alarming, we should begin here. Beauty in the Middle Ages was not a side note. It was part of how people lived inside class, gender, religion, medicine, and desire. It could be practical, ambitious, superstitious, intimate, expensive, humble. and sometimes wonderfully strange. That is exactly what makes it worth following slowly. One of the strangest medieval beauty habits, at least to modern eyes, is the value placed on pale skin, because today people often speak about complexion in terms of glow, evenness, or health, while in the Middle Ages paleness could carry a much sharper social meaning. It was not simply that lighter skin looked delicate or attractive. It suggested something about the life behind the face. A pale complexion could imply that a person was protected from long hours of heavy outdoor labour, and that mattered in a society where class could be read directly from the body. Beauty and status were very close companions. If the sun marked the peasant and the labourer, then paleness could be admired as the visible proof of a more sheltered existence. This did not mean every medieval person with pale skin was treated as beautiful, or that everyone sought the same degree of whiteness in the same way, but it does explain why so many beauty ideals lean toward lighter complexions, especially among elite women. A clear, pale face could suggest youth, refinement, and gentleness, all qualities that were admired not only aesthetically but socially. The face became a kind of public announcement. It declared whether one belonged to rough labour or to a life somewhat removed from it. That is one reason complexion was never a neutral feature. It was loaded with information. To preserve or imitate this look, people relied on shade, coverings, and various homemade preparations meant to soften, lighten, or protect the skin. Some of these were mild enough, involving washing, cloths, herbal waters, or careful avoidance of too much sun. Others moved into the more questionable territory that beauty has always loved, where hope outruns good sense and the body is asked to endure strange treatment in exchange for a finer appearance. Medieval beauty manuals and household traditions could recommend mixtures that sound almost soothing, beside others that feel more like the result of someone staring at a plant too confidently and deciding the face should become involved. What makes this ideal so revealing is that it reminds us beauty was never just about the face itself. It was about the life the face seemed to represent. A pale complexion did not merely say, "This person is attractive." It could also say, "This person is protected, elevated, delicate, or removed from coarser forms of work." That is why complexion mattered so much. Medieval people were not only looking at skin, they were reading class, effort, and privilege written just beneath it. Hair mattered enormously in medieval beauty, but not always in the simple modern sense of wanting it merely thick, shiny, or fashionable. It was often treated as a frame for the face, something that could change the entire impression of a person before a single word was spoken. Colour, texture, neatness, softness, and the way hair was arranged all carried meaning. Beautiful hair could suggest youth, health, good care, and refinement. Unruly or neglected hair could suggest the opposite. And because the face was so socially important, anything that shaped the face became important too. This helps explain one of the stranger habits medieval beauty became known for: the deliberate adjustment of the hairline. In some places and periods, especially among elite women, a high forehead was admired, and that admiration could become intense enough that women plucked or altered the hair at the front of the head to create a broader, smoother space above the brows. To modern eyes, this can look surprising, even slightly alarming, but it made sense within an aesthetic that associated a certain kind of open forehead with elegance, delicacy, and controlled beauty. It was not random oddness, it was the body being persuaded to match an ideal that everyone around it had agreed to take seriously. Hair care itself could involve combing, oils, rinses, coverings, and careful arrangement. People did not live in conditions that made beautiful hair effortless, so maintaining it required real attention. Smoke, dust, rough fabric, weather, and limited washing all made grooming more difficult. That is why combs mattered so much. So did head coverings, braids, pins, and cloth wraps. Medieval beauty often worked through management rather than total transformation. Hair was controlled, softened, hidden, displayed, or reshaped, depending on the person, the class, the age, and the desired impression. What makes this so revealing is that medieval beauty was often not trying to celebrate the body in its most natural state. It was trying to guide the body toward a more meaningful version of itself. Hair was part of that effort. It could be corrected, framed, concealed, or refined until the face seemed to belong more completely to the world of beauty, order, and status. Once complexion became important, skin itself turned into a field of constant attention, and this is where medieval beauty habits could become especially strange. People wanted clearer skin, softer skin, smoother skin, and skin that looked calm, bright, and refined rather than rough, reddened, or marked by labour and weather. That desire is perfectly familiar. What feels unfamiliar is the range of things medieval people were willing to put on the face in pursuit of it. Beauty manuals, household recipes, and inherited advice could move easily from the gentle and sensible into the faintly unnerving. Some treatments were mild enough. Washing the face with herbal waters, applying softening mixtures, using cloths, oils, or simple plant preparations, and trying to soothe rather than attack the skin, all belong to a beauty logic we can still recognize. But medieval beauty did not stop there. Once people began believing that certain ingredients could whiten, smooth, tighten, cool, or refresh the face, the list of possible remedies expanded in ways that now sound much less reassuring. The face, unfortunately, has always inspired human beings to become more experimental than wisdom necessarily recommends. What makes this especially interesting is that these remedies often sat halfway between beauty and medicine. Medieval people did not always divide the two as sharply as we do. A treatment for redness, roughness, blemishes, or discoloration might be understood as both cosmetic and corrective, a way of restoring the body to a more proper visible state. This gave beauty a seriousness beyond vanity. Better skin was not just more attractive. It could also look healthier, calmer, and more socially acceptable. The face was expected to communicate balance, and people were willing to help it do so, sometimes very carefully, and sometimes with remarkable confidence in mixtures that should perhaps have remained theoretical. What this reveals, more than anything, is how beauty encourages hope. Medieval people looked at the face and believed it could be improved, managed, persuaded, even repaired. That belief produced some remedies that sound soothing and others that sound like the beginning of a regrettable afternoon. But beneath both lies the same old human wish, that the skin might look a little kinder to us than life has actually been. One of the easiest mistakes to make about medieval beauty is to imagine that because medieval life was full of smoke, animals, sweat, damp cloth, open streets, and all the other powerful smells of a less sanitized world. People must have stopped caring about how they themselves smelled. But that is not how human beings work. The stronger a world smells, the more noticeable pleasantness and unpleasantness can become. Medieval people were perfectly aware that the body carried scent, and that scent could make someone seem cleaner, more attractive, more refined, or more offensive. Beauty, then, was not only visual, it was also aromatic, though not in the polished modern sense of perfume counters and neatly bottled certainty. This is where beauty habits could become both practical and strange. People used herbs, flowers, oils, scented waters, and other fragrant materials to soften the impression of the body or clothing. Hair might be perfumed lightly, garments or gloves could be scented, rooms, beds, and linens might be freshened where possible. Breath, too, received attention, because beauty has always understood that a beautiful face loses some of its authority when the mouth begins telling a less encouraging story. Medieval remedies for the breath could involve herbs, seeds, spices, rinses, and all the little experiments by which one tries to convince the mouth to behave more honourably in company than nature had intended. What makes this especially interesting is that scent worked like status in miniature. A person who smelled fresh, clean, or pleasantly herb-scented suggested care, resources, and a certain degree of bodily order. A person who smelled too strongly of labour, stale cloth, or neglect suggested something else. This did not mean medieval people expected complete victory over smell. That would have been unrealistic even by their own standards. But they clearly believed improvement was possible, and they pursued it with a seriousness that feels instantly recognizable. One may live in a strong-smelling century and still wish to smell better than the room. What this reveals is that medieval beauty was never just about what the eye admired from a distance. It was also about the body as something experienced up close. A handsome face, soft hair, pale skin, and elegant clothing all mattered, but so did the invisible atmosphere a person carried with them. In a world where scent travelled quickly and privacy was rare, smelling reasonably pleasant was not a small detail. It was one more way beauty tried to win its quiet argument against ordinary life. Teeth are one of the clearest places where modern beauty standards and medieval beauty standards begin to separate, because medieval people did not expect the kind of smooth, brilliantly even smile that modern advertising has trained us to treat as almost moral proof of good character. But that does not mean teeth were ignored. Far from it. Teeth still mattered, because the mouth mattered. A pleasant face could be weakened by visible decay, bad breath, pain, or neglect, and medieval people were no less aware of this than we are. They simply lived in a world with fewer reliable ways to prevent the body from disappointing them. This produced beauty habits that sat somewhere between grooming, medicine, and wishful discipline. Teeth might be cleaned with cloths, rubbed with powders, rinsed, or treated with mixtures believed to whiten, strengthen, or freshen them. Some of these methods sound harmless enough, even sensible in a rough early way. Others begin to feel less like dental care and more like the sort of thing one does when the mouth has become a battlefield and hope is improvising wildly. Medieval advice about the teeth could be practical, but it could also become confident in remedies that seem far better suited to frightening the problem than solving it. What matters most is that teeth were part of appearance, not merely part of eating. They affected speech, smell, expression, and the overall impression of the face. A person did not need perfect teeth to be attractive, but visibly damaged or painful teeth could disturb the whole harmony that beauty was trying to create. That is one reason dental care, however limited, belonged inside the broader world of beauty habits. The mouth was one more place where the body could either cooperate with social life or make things more difficult than anyone had hoped. What this reveals, once again, is how medieval beauty often worked through maintenance rather than perfection. People were not chasing a flawless modern smile. They were trying to preserve dignity, reduce damage, improve appearance where possible, and hold the body together in a form that remained pleasant enough to live with and be seen by others. That may not sound glamorous, but it is deeply human. Beauty has always had to negotiate with teeth, and teeth have rarely negotiated kindly in return. Hands reveal an awkward truth about beauty in any age, which is that the body rarely keeps its secrets evenly. A face can be washed, shaded, softened, and carefully presented, but hands are much harder to persuade. They work, they carry, they scrub, they stitch, they hold tools, they age quickly, and they tell the truth about a person's life with a stubborn honesty. Medieval people understood this perfectly well. Beautiful hands, especially among women of higher status, were admired as signs of care, refinement, and distance from rough labour. Softness, paleness, smooth skin, and neatly kept nails all belonged to the ideal, even if reality often had other plans. That ideal could become especially strange because it existed in a world where hands were under constant attack from work, weather, washing, cold, rough cloth, and household tasks. This meant beauty habits around the hands were often less about transformation than about damage control. People tried to soften them with oils, cloths, rinses, and protective coverings where possible. Gloves, especially scented or fine ones, could become part of this effort, not only because they looked elegant, but because they helped preserve the appearance of the skin beneath. A beautiful hand was not just a beautiful hand. It was evidence that the body had been protected from certain kinds of contact with the world. What makes this especially interesting is that hands sat at the border between status and truth. A noble woman or well-kept lady might present hands that suggested leisure, delicacy, or gentility, while a working woman's hands might carry the marks of spinning, washing, kneading, and care. Men too were read through their hands, though the meaning shifted. A skilled craftsman's hands might be admired for competence even when they were rough, while very soft male hands could imply a life removed from harder labour. Beauty, in other words, did not ask the same thing of every body. The same hand could signify refinement in one person and suspicious uselessness in another. What this reveals is that medieval beauty was constantly negotiating with evidence. The body wanted to show its life, and beauty wanted to edit that story without erasing it so completely that it became absurd. Hands were one of the hardest places to manage because they were so visible and so honest. That is exactly why people cared about them. The harder a thing is to control, the more powerful it becomes as a sign of who you are. One of the strangest modern misunderstandings about medieval beauty is the idea that people either did not bathe at all or bathed so rarely that beauty could not possibly have included the body in any serious way. But medieval beauty did include the body. It simply approached it under more difficult conditions. Bathing existed, washing existed, scented waters existed. Cloths, oils, rinses, combs, and all the little acts of bodily maintenance existed too. The strange part is not that medieval people ignored cleanliness. The strange part is how much effort beauty required in a world where water, heat, privacy, and comfort all had to be negotiated rather than assumed. This is what makes medieval bathing habits feel so fascinating. A full bath could be pleasant, luxurious, refreshing, and socially meaningful, yet it was not always easy to arrange. Water had to be heated, carried, contained, and used wisely. In some places, public bathhouses made this easier, and beauty could become briefly connected with pleasure, social life, and the softening of the body. In other settings, more modest washing with basins, cloths, and partial care may have been far more common. Beauty, then, did not depend only on whether someone immersed themselves fully. It also depended on whether the face had been washed, the hair combed, the hands cared for, the linen refreshed, and the body made reasonably presentable. What makes this especially interesting is that bathing could sit in an awkward place between beauty, health, and moral suspicion. A warm bath might soften skin, freshen the body, and restore comfort, all of which belong naturally to beauty. But pleasure in the body has rarely passed through history without attracting someone's concern. Bathing too often, too indulgently, or in the wrong social setting could easily begin to look questionable to moralists, which meant beauty had to pursue cleanliness while remaining respectable. The body could be cared for, but not too lovingly. That has a very old sound to it. What this reveals is that medieval beauty was not built on one perfect routine. It worked through a whole collection of smaller choices about how much freshness, softness, and bodily grace a person could realistically achieve without slipping into waste, impropriety, or simple inconvenience. A beautiful body in the Middle Ages was not always a perfectly bathed body. More often, it was a managed body, one made as pleasing as possible within the limits of the age. One of the strangest modern misunderstandings about medieval beauty is the idea that people either did not bathe at all or bathed so rarely that beauty could not possibly have included the body in any serious way. But medieval beauty did include the body. It simply approached it under more difficult conditions. Bathing existed, washing existed, scented waters existed. Cloths, oils, rinses, combs, and all the little acts of bodily maintenance existed too. The strange part is not that medieval people ignored cleanliness. The strange part is how much effort beauty required in a world where water, heat, privacy, and comfort all had to be negotiated rather than assumed. This is what makes medieval bathing habits feel so fascinating. A full bath could be pleasant, luxurious, refreshing, and socially meaningful, yet it was not always easy to arrange. Water had to be heated, carried, contained, and used wisely. In some places, public bathhouses made this easier, and beauty could become briefly connected with pleasure, social life, and the softening of the body. In other settings, more modest washing with basins, cloths, and partial care may have been far more common. Beauty, then, did not depend only on whether someone immersed themselves fully. It also depended on whether the face had been washed, the hair combed, the hands cared for, the linen refreshed, and the body made reasonably presentable. What makes this especially interesting is that bathing could sit in an awkward place between beauty, health, and moral suspicion. A warm bath might soften skin, freshen the body, and restore comfort, all of which belong naturally to beauty. But pleasure in the body has rarely passed through history without attracting someone's concern. Bathing too often, too indulgently, or in the wrong social setting could easily begin to look questionable to moralists, which meant beauty had to pursue cleanliness while remaining respectable. The body could be cared for, but not too lovingly. That has a very old sound to it. What this reveals is that medieval beauty was not built on one perfect routine. It worked through a whole collection of smaller choices about how much freshness, softness, and bodily grace a person could realistically achieve without slipping into waste, impropriety, or simple inconvenience. A beautiful body in the Middle Ages was not always a perfectly bathed body. More often, it was a managed body, one made as pleasing as possible within the limits of the age. One of the strangest things about medieval beauty is that it could praise natural attractiveness, while still asking the face to look very carefully managed. This is not unusual in human history. People often claim to admire what seems effortless, while quietly building entire routines to produce that exact illusion. In the medieval world, the ideal face was expected to appear clear, balanced, calm, youthful, and socially appropriate, but achieving that appearance could involve a surprising amount of interference. Hairlines might be altered, skin might be treated, brows and facial details were watched closely. The face was not left entirely to itself simply because the culture claimed to value modesty. This is where beauty becomes especially interesting, because the ideal was often not dramatic in the modern sense. Medieval people were not usually chasing bold transformation for its own sake. They wanted refinement. They wanted the face to look smoother, cleaner, gentler, and better ordered than daily life naturally allowed. Too much visible alteration could become suspicious, vain, or morally uncomfortable, yet too little care could look careless. So the face had to be improved in a way that still allowed it to seem proper. Beauty was expected to help nature, not openly replace it, even when the helping hand was doing quite a lot of work. That tension produced some very strange habits. A forehead could be widened because a certain shape of face was admired. Skin could be lightened or softened because complexion carried social meaning. Hair could be hidden, arranged, or controlled to improve the harmony of the whole head. The strange part is not simply that people changed the face, it is that they often did so in pursuit of an ideal that was supposed to look restrained, disciplined, and almost innocent of visible effort. Medieval beauty could therefore be quite artificial, while still pretending, in its own way, to be natural. What this reveals is that medieval beauty was not naive. It understood very well that the face was social territory. A person walked into the world carrying it like a small public argument about youth, status, care, and desirability. The face had to speak well before the mouth even opened. That is why so many odd beauty habits gathered there. People were not only decorating themselves, they were editing the first impression their existence would make. One of the stranger medieval beauty habits is how often beauty involved not adding something to the body, but taking something away. Hair, especially facial hair or hair too close to the wrong part of the face, could be treated as an obstacle to elegance rather than a natural feature to be accepted. This was particularly true for women, whose beauty ideals often lean towards smoothness, openness, and controlled delicacy. A broad forehead, a clean line above the brow, and a face that seemed calm and unobstructed were admired in many settings, and that meant hair could become the enemy of refinement surprisingly quickly. This is where practices like plucking, shaping, and removing unwanted hair begin to matter. We have already spoken of altered hairlines, but the logic did not always stop there. Brows could be thinned or shaped. Stray facial hair could be treated as something embarrassing, unfeminine, or simply disruptive to the ideal face. To modern eyes, this may feel strangely familiar in impulse, even if the methods were harsher, less predictable, and probably far less comfortable. Medieval people did not invent the desire to look effortlessly smooth. They simply pursued it with fewer gentle tools and a great deal more faith in household remedies than modern skin would necessarily appreciate. What makes this especially interesting is that hair removal was never only aesthetic, it was also symbolic. A smoother face could suggest youth, class, discipline, and bodily control. Too much visible hair in the wrong place might make the face seem coarser, older, or less aligned with the ideal of delicacy that elite beauty often demanded. Once again, the body was being asked to tell a social story. Beauty did not merely want the face to be attractive. It wanted it to appear properly ordered, as though nature had already known its place and behaved politely from the beginning. What this reveals is that medieval beauty often treated the body as something that needed editing rather than simple admiration. The strange part is not that people cared about unwanted hair. The strange part is how old that concern really is, and how familiar the logic still sounds beneath all the historical distance. A person looks in the mirror, notices one small thing that seems to disturb the harmony of the whole face, and decides that peace will return only once that one small thing has been persuaded to disappear. History, in this matter, is embarrassingly consistent. It was not enough in the Middle Ages for hair to be beautiful. It also had to behave. That may sound unfair to hair, and in truth it probably was, but medieval beauty did not usually admire wildness for very long. Hair could be long, soft, shining, and richly coloured, yet it was still expected to sit properly within the larger order of the face, the body, the social role, and the moral expectations surrounding the person. Beautiful hair that looked too loose, too public, too unruly, or too sensually alive could cross from admired into suspect with surprising speed. In that sense, medieval beauty wanted grace, but controlled grace. This is especially clear in the treatment of women's hair. Loose hair could carry associations with youth, maidenhood, sensuality, or intimacy, depending on the context, while covered, braided, pinned, or otherwise arranged hair suggested modesty, discipline, and social maturity. A woman's hair was therefore never just hair. It could announce age, status, chastity, marriage, and general respectability before the face had even fully entered the room. That is why combing, braiding, covering, and ordering the hair were not minor details. They were part of the moral styling of the body. Men too lived under hair expectations, though in different ways. Their hair and beards could suggest maturity, authority, roughness, vanity, or discipline, depending on period and place. A badly kept beard or untidy hair might suggest neglect, while a carefully maintained appearance might imply control, status, or urban refinement. Medieval beauty, then, was not only concerned with how attractive hair looked in isolation, it cared about whether the hair seemed to belong properly to the kind of person one was claiming to be. What this reveals is that hair in the medieval world was expected to communicate beauty without becoming socially unruly. It had to flatter the face, but also obey the culture. That is one of the strangest and most familiar things about beauty across time. Even what grows naturally from the body is rarely allowed to remain entirely natural for long. One of the most revealing things about medieval beauty is that cosmetics certainly existed, yet they often had to move through culture in a slightly apologetic way, as though they wished to improve the face while also insisting they were not doing anything improper at all. People used colour, powders, washes, ointments, and other preparations to alter or refine appearance. But beauty in the Middle Ages often lived under moral observation. A face could be enhanced, yet it was not supposed to look shamelessly manufactured. The ideal was not usually bold theatrical transformation. It was controlled improvement that still allowed the person to seem respectable, modest, and properly governed. This tension made cosmetics especially strange. On the one hand, people clearly wanted help from them. They wanted skin to look smoother, paler, calmer, and more even. They wanted the face to appear younger or less marked by weather, fatigue, and ordinary life. On the other hand, visible artificiality could make beauty look suspicious. Too much colour, too much obvious manipulation, or too much delight in appearance could begin to smell of vanity, and vanity has rarely found warm welcome in heavily moralised societies. So, cosmetics had to perform a kind of double task. They had to improve the body while denying, or at least softening, the fact that improvement had been pursued deliberately. This is why medieval cosmetic habits often seem subtler in intention than modern makeup culture, even when the ingredients themselves could be quite strong or surprising. A preparation might be described less as adornment and more as cleansing, correcting, refreshing, or restoring. The face was not being decorated, at least not in the language used to defend the practice. It was being brought closer to what it ought to have looked like all along. Beauty loves this argument. It has used it for centuries. The product is never merely changing the face. It is helping, improving, or revealing what was somehow always there. What this reveals is that medieval beauty was deeply aware of judgment. Cosmetics were not simply personal tools. They were social risks as well as social aids. A person wanted to look better, but not so visibly better that everyone began wondering what had been hidden, corrected, or too eagerly pursued. In that narrow space between improvement and accusation, medieval beauty found some of its strangest habits and some of its most human anxieties. One of the most important things to remember about medieval beauty is that it was never truly one single ideal shared equally by everyone, because beauty in the Middle Ages was deeply shaped by class, and class changed not only what looked attractive, but what was even possible to maintain. A noblewoman, a merchant's wife, a servant, a peasant girl, a cleric, or a wealthy townswoman did not meet the body from the same position. They lived with different fabrics, different diets, different exposures to sun and cold, different amounts of labour, different access to privacy, and different levels of social scrutiny. Beauty, then, was not simply a matter of taste, it was also a matter of circumstance. This is why certain beauty ideals could be admired by many while being realistically achievable only by a few. pale skin, soft hands, cleaner linen, carefully managed hair, fresher scent, and a calmer complexion all become much easier to preserve when one is protected from harsher forms of work. A noble woman might seem naturally delicate when much of that delicacy had in fact been purchased through servants, shade, better fabrics, and distance from heavy labour. A peasant woman, by contrast, might still care about beauty deeply, but her body was required to do things that beauty ideals often pretended not to notice. The face that the culture praised was not always the face that labour allowed. Men lived this difference too, though in a different way. A nobleman could carry beauty through grooming, rich cloth, healthy colour, good teeth if fortune had been merciful, and the general appearance of a body not worn down in the same manner as a poor man's. A craftsman or labourer, however, might be judged attractive through strength, steadiness, good form, and competence, rather than through softness or refinement. Medieval beauty was therefore not a single ladder everyone climbed in the same direction. It was more like several overlapping standards, all influenced by the same society, but adjusted according to what kind of person one was expected to be. What this reveals is that beauty was never separate from power. People were not merely trying to look good in some timeless abstract sense. They were trying to look right for their place, and if possible, a little better than their place strictly required. That is part of what makes medieval beauty so strange and so familiar. The creams, cloths, combs, and small rituals may differ from ours, but the deeper desire has not changed very much at all. People still want the body to tell a flattering story about the life behind it, even when that story leaves out a great deal. One of the strangest things about medieval beauty is that people clearly cared about looking attractive, and yet attraction itself could become morally uneasy if it appeared too deliberate, too sensual, or too proud of its own success. Beauty was admired, but vanity was distrusted. A lovely face, graceful hair, clear skin, and elegant clothing could all be praised. Yet the moment someone seemed too aware of their own effect on others, the whole matter could begin to darken. This gave medieval beauty a slightly nervous quality. It was allowed, even valued, but it was not supposed to become openly self-worshipping. This was especially true for women, whose appearance was often judged through a narrower moral lens. A woman was expected to be pleasing without seeming provocative, well-kept without looking vain, attractive without appearing to hunger too openly for admiration. That is not an easy balance in any century, and it was certainly not easy in one where religion shaped the public language of virtue so strongly. Beauty could be treated almost like fire, useful, desirable, warming, even beautiful in itself, but dangerous if handled with too much confidence or delight. A woman who cared for her appearance had to do so in a way that could still be explained as modest, proper, or socially fitting, rather than openly seductive. Men lived under this tension too, though often less severely. Excessive grooming, scented display, or visible obsession with appearance could make a man seem soft, frivolous, or morally suspect, especially if beauty began to outweigh dignity, skill, or seriousness. A handsome man was acceptable. A man too absorbed in being handsome was something else. Medieval beauty therefore carried a moral burden for both sexes, though not equally. The body was expected to look good, but not to look as though it had become the centre of one's soul. What this reveals is that medieval beauty was never only aesthetic, it lived under judgment. People wanted to be admired, but not condemned for wanting it. They wanted the body to shine a little, but not so brightly that conscience, clergy, or neighbours began narrowing their eyes. That tension helps explain why so many beauty habits feel both intimate and cautious at the same time. The body was being improved, yes, but always under the shadow of the question, how much beauty is still innocence, and when does it become pride? One of the least surprising and most revealing parts of medieval beauty is that people, then as now, were deeply interested in looking younger than time perhaps intended. Youth carried enormous beauty value. A smooth face, brighter eyes, firmer skin, softer hands, and unmarked features could suggest freshness, fertility, health, desirability, and social promise all at once. Age, by contrast, left its record gradually but persistently. Skin loosened, colour changed, lines deepened, hair thinned or altered, and the face became harder to keep in harmony with the ideals beauty preferred. That meant beauty habits often turned into a quiet struggle against visible aging. This struggle did not always take dramatic form. Medieval people were not generally chasing the total illusion of eternal youth in the modern commercial way, but they were certainly trying to delay the signs of decline where possible. Skin preparations, hair care, scented washes, cloths, oils, and all the little routines of grooming could serve not only present beauty, but preservation. A face that remained clear and calm, a body that smelled fresh, hair that still behaved, hands that looked cared for, and clothing that helped sustain an impression of order could all soften the passage of time in social terms, even if they could not defeat it physically. What makes this especially interesting is that age was not only biological, it was social. A person could begin to look older, not simply because years had passed, but because labour, grief, childbirth, weather, illness, poor sleep and anxiety had begun, writing too boldly across the face and body. Medieval beauty habits were therefore often attempts to quiet those visible signs, to persuade the body not to reveal too much too soon. The wish beneath all this is painfully familiar. People were not merely afraid of wrinkles in the abstract. They were afraid of becoming less admired, less marriageable, less desirable, less powerful, or simply less gently treated by the world. What this reveals is that medieval beauty was not just decoration laid over the present moment. It was also resistance to change. The body was expected to age, of course, but beauty asked whether it might do so a little more slowly, a little more gracefully, and a little less honestly than nature preferred. History has never lacked optimism in this particular matter. Clothing in the Middle Ages was never just a layer placed over the body like an afterthought. It was part of beauty itself, because once the face and hair had done their work, the garment had to continue the argument. A beautiful person was expected not only to possess attractive features, but to appear properly arranged, proportioned, and socially legible from head to hem. This is one reason medieval beauty habits often extended into fabric choice, colour, layering, fit, and adornment. Clothing was not simply protection, it was correction, enhancement, and performance all at once. This mattered especially because the body could be helped by cloth in ways that nature alone did not always provide. Good fabric could soften harshness, richer colour could brighten a pale face, careful shaping could make posture look more elegant, and the right garments could signal grace, modesty, or rank before a person even moved. Medieval people understood perfectly well that the body is read as a whole, A lovely face in poor or disorderly clothing could lose some of its effect. A more ordinary face, by contrast, could be elevated by fine presentation. Beauty has always loved alliance, and clothing was one of its most reliable allies. What makes this especially interesting is that clothing had to flatter the body while still obeying the rules of class, gender, and morality. A woman could not simply dress in whatever most beautified her if the result looked too bold, too luxurious, or too suggestive for her station. A man similarly could improve himself through clothing, but not so much that dignity slipped into vanity or softness. Medieval beauty therefore treated garments as powerful tools, but also as dangerous ones. Cloth could raise a person socially, but it could also expose them to judgment if it seemed to claim too much. What this reveals is that medieval beauty was not content with skin alone. It wanted the whole visible self to appear ordered, persuasive, and attractive within the rules of the world. Clothing did not merely finish beauty, it often completed it. One of the stranger tensions in medieval beauty is that people admired freshness, brightness, smooth skin, soft hair, and a generally well-kept appearance, yet the actual conditions of medieval sleep did not always cooperate very kindly with those hopes. A beautiful face might be praised in the morning, but the night behind it could have involved shared beds, smoke in the room, rough linen, interrupted rest, noise, cold, heat, children, illness, animals nearby, or the ordinary discomforts of a world that did not arrange sleep around perfect bodily restoration. Beauty wanted the body to wake looking calm and renewed. Medieval life often replied that this was a charming ambition. This helps explain why morning grooming mattered so much. A person did not always emerge from sleep already fit to be seen. Hair had to be rearranged, faces had to be washed, eyes, breath, skin, and clothing all needed some kind of recovery from the night. In that sense, beauty was not only about preparing the body for admiration in general. It was also about repairing the small, visible injuries done by ordinary living. A badly slept face could look older, rougher, duller, or less composed. And medieval people were not blind to that. They may not have spoken in modern language about sleep quality and appearance, but they clearly understood that the body after rest could either help beauty or quietly betray it. What makes this especially interesting is that nighttime itself could become part of beauty strategy. Clean linen, aired bedding, scented materials, combed hair before sleep, and all the little habits meant to preserve the body through the night were not merely domestic niceties. They were ways of trying to wake into a more favourable version of oneself. Medieval beauty, once again, was not simply decorative. It was preventive where possible. If the night could not be made fully gentle, perhaps it could at least be persuaded not to leave too heavy a mark. What this reveals is that beauty in the Middle Ages was often built in dialogue with discomfort. The body was expected to look graceful by day, even when the night had not treated it especially well. That may be one of the most familiar things about it. Across centuries, beauty has always had to do some of its best work in the morning, quietly correcting what life did while nobody was looking. One of the strangest and most human things about medieval beauty is the way advice moved from person to person, because beauty knowledge did not live only in formal books or among the wealthy. It also travelled through households, servants, mothers, daughters, friends, baths, markets, and the quiet authority of someone saying that a certain rinse, powder, oil, or herb had worked for somebody's cousin, aunt, mistress, or neighbour, and therefore deserve to be trusted immediately. Beauty advice has always loved this kind of journey. It moves best when certainty is weak and hope is strong, and the Middle Ages offered exactly that mixture. This meant that beauty habits often existed in a curious space between medicine, tradition, and rumour. A skin preparation might be recommended not only because it made the face look better, but because it was said to cool the body, calm redness, restore balance, or remove some troubling excess from the skin. A hair rinse might promise softness and shine while also claiming to strengthen the scalp or correct an unseen imbalance. A breath remedy might sit halfway between hygiene and herbal belief. Medieval people were not always separating beauty from health in the way we do now, and that gave beauty advice a very broad field in which to grow more elaborate than wisdom might have preferred. What makes this especially interesting is that beauty knowledge could become social power. A woman known for keeping her skin well, her hair elegant, or her household pleasantly scented might also become the sort of person others listened to. Advice itself had prestige when it seemed to produce visible results. At the same time, advice could be wildly uneven in quality. Some remedies were probably harmless, practical, and gently effective. Others feel, from a distance, like the product of one successful accident repeated with far too much confidence. But that is part of the charm and danger of beauty culture in every age. Once a remedy enters the world wearing a reputation for success, it becomes very difficult to make it leave politely. What this reveals is that medieval beauty was not only something people practiced, it was something they talked about, shared, improved, distorted, and passed along. Beauty habits were part of a living social world, not a fixed system handed down perfectly from above. They spread the way so many intimate things spread, through trust, imitation, envy, curiosity, and the old persuasive force of someone leaning closer and saying with complete confidence that this is what really works. When people think about medieval beauty, they often imagine women carrying nearly all of its weight, as though men were somehow permitted to walk through the Middle Ages in whatever condition fate and bad grooming had left them. But that is not quite true. Men too were judged by appearance. The difference is that male beauty was often described more cautiously, less as ornament and more as dignity, health, strength, cleanliness, and proper bearing. A handsome man was supposed to look well, but not too deliberately well. He could be admired, but he was not meant to appear as though admiration had become his main occupation. This created a beauty standard that sounds modest on the surface, but could still be quite demanding. A man was expected to have orderly hair, a face that looked healthy rather than neglected, hands that might show work without seeming filthy, decent teeth if fortune had been kind, fresh enough breath, clean, or at least reasonably maintained clothing, and a body that suggested competence. In noble or courtly settings, elegance could become more visible through fabric, posture, grooming, and scent. In urban life, refinement might show itself in cleaner presentation, trimmed facial hair, and the sort of polished self-command that trade and reputation rewarded. In rougher labouring life, beauty was less about softness and more about steadiness, good form, and an appearance of bodily usefulness that had not yet collapsed into disorder. What makes this especially interesting is that men had to appear attractive without seeming vain, strong without seeming animal, refined without seeming weak, and serious without becoming visually miserable. That is a narrow bridge to walk across in any century. A nobleman might care deeply about how he presented himself, but if he seemed too scented, too adorned, or too absorbed in his own elegance, people could begin reading him in unflattering ways. A labouring man, meanwhile, could not neglect the body entirely without losing some of the respect attached to masculine order. Beauty then did not disappear for men, it simply changed its vocabulary. What this reveals is that medieval beauty was never purely feminine, even if women bore more of its explicit pressure. Men too were being watched. Their faces, beards, clothing, smell, posture, and general condition all entered social judgment. The strange part is not that male beauty existed. The strange part is how often history prefers to pretend that men were judged only by deeds, when in truth the body was already speaking for them long before any deed was explained. One of the strangest aspects of medieval beauty is that the body was rarely judged only as a body. It was also judged as a sign of character. A clear face, controlled hair, clean linen, modest elegance, and a generally ordered appearance could suggest not merely attractiveness, but virtue. The opposite could happen just as easily. A face that looked neglected, too painted, too sensual, too rough, or too disorderly might be read not only as less beautiful, but as morally troubling. Medieval beauty therefore carried an unusual burden. It was expected to please the eye, while also reassuring the conscience. This helps explain why so many beauty habits sat in an awkward middle space. People wanted to improve the body, but they also wanted that improvement to look justified. A pale complexion could suggest refinement, but it also needed to seem natural enough to remain respectable. Groomed hair could be admired, but not if it looked too provocative or self-conscious. Scent could make a person more appealing, yet not if it suggested indulgence. Beauty had to remain under control. It could shine, but only through a veil of restraint. The ideal face was not simply beautiful, it was disciplined. What makes this especially interesting is that the body became a surface on which wider social hopes were written. People wanted beauty that looked innocent, desire that looked modest, and effort that did not appear too effortful. A woman was praised for seeming graceful rather than visibly worked upon. A man was praised for looking strong, composed, and well kept rather than decorated. In both cases, the body was being asked to communicate moral balance. Too little care could seem careless. Too much care could seem corrupting. The right amount had to look almost inevitable, as though the body had quietly chosen virtue on its own. What this reveals is that medieval beauty was never free. It had to live inside moral interpretation at every step. People were not only asking, does this person look attractive? They were also asking, what sort of person does this appearance suggest? That is one reason medieval beauty habits could become so strange. They were not trying to create beauty alone. They were trying to create beauty that could survive judgment. At its heart, one of the strangest medieval beauty habits was not the use of any single herb, powder, rinse, or plucked hairline, but the larger effort behind all of them. Beauty often meant hiding the ordinary evidence of life itself. Sun, smoke, work, childbirth, stress, weather, rough linen, poor sleep, grief, and time all left their marks on the body, and medieval beauty spent much of its energy trying to soften, disguise, or delay those marks before other people could read them too easily. A beautiful person was not expected to look untouched by existence exactly, but they were expected to look as though existence had handled them a little more gently than it handled everyone else. This is why pale skin mattered, why hair was managed so carefully, why scent was cultivated, why hands were softened when possible, why bathing and linen mattered, and why the face became the centre of so much hopeful intervention. The body was constantly threatening to tell the truth. Beauty stepped in and asked whether that truth might be edited, not erased completely, because that would often have looked suspicious, but softened, disciplined, and translated into something more flattering. Medieval beauty was therefore not only decorative, it was corrective in a social sense. It helped the body tell a better story than life alone had written. What makes this especially interesting is that the same logic still survives. People have always wanted the face to conceal exhaustion, the skin to conceal hardship, the body to conceal age, and clothing to conceal social uncertainty. Medieval beauty simply pursued those goals with a different set of tools and a different language of virtue. Beneath the strange ingredients and stranger advice lies a very familiar emotional wish, not merely to be seen, but to be seen in a form that invites admiration instead of judgment. Beauty promised that possibility even when it could only grant it imperfectly. What this reveals is that medieval beauty habits were strange less because the people were strange, and more because their world was hard enough to make beauty look like a small rebellion against ordinary damage. A smoother face, fresher breath, cleaner linen, softer hands, calmer scent, better hair. These were all small victories over the daily force of life pressing itself onto the body. That is what made beauty worth the trouble, and perhaps what made it worth believing in, even when the remedies themselves became wonderfully questionable. Another strange truth about medieval beauty is that it was not created only on the body itself. It was also created through the things that touch the body most closely. Linen, veils, head coverings, sleeves, gloves, undergarments, and carefully chosen fabrics all helped shape whether a person appeared fresh, soft, refined, or dull. Medieval people understood very well that the skin does not exist alone. Cloth affects it, frames it, protects it, and in some cases quietly improves it. A clean face looked better beside clean linen. Good hair looked better when properly covered or revealed. Hands appeared more elegant when they emerged from fine sleeves or gloves. Beauty, then, was not only cosmetic, it was textile. This is one reason linen mattered so much. Clean linen next to the skin could make a person feel fresher even when full bathing was inconvenient. And that freshness was not only physical, it changed how the whole body presented itself. A person in well-kept linen seemed more ordered, more cared for, more socially acceptable. The same was true of veils, coverings, and layered dress. Medieval beauty often relied on contrast and framing. The face had to emerge correctly from the garment. The hands had to appear at the right moment. The body was not displayed in isolation, but arranged. In that sense, clothing did not merely decorate beauty, it helped stage it. What this reveals is that medieval beauty was often more environmental than we first assume. It did not begin and end with a remedy in a bowl. It lived in cloth chests, washing routines, folded linen, scented garments, brushed veils, and the soft visual order created when body and fabric worked together. A beautiful person was not simply someone with attractive features. It was someone whose whole visible presentation had been made coherent. That coherence could take work, money, patience, and a surprising amount of washing, folding, and arranging behind the scenes. Beauty has always loved to appear effortless while resting on an unreasonable quantity of preparation. When we step back from the pale skin, the plucked hairlines, the herbal rinses, the scented breath remedies, the careful linen, the managed hands, the controlled beards, the softened faces, the suspicious cosmetics, and all the other strange little habits that shaped appearance in the Middle Ages. What begins to emerge is not a ridiculous parade of outdated vanity, but something much more interesting. Medieval beauty was a serious attempt to negotiate with the body under difficult conditions. It asked the face to look calmer than life had been, the skin to look softer than labour allowed, the hair to behave, the body to smell better than the world around it, and the whole visible self to suggest health, status, order, and grace even when daily reality was busy attacking all of those things at once. That is why medieval beauty could feel so contradictory. It wanted refinement, but distrusted vanity. It admired youth, but lived in a world that aged people quickly. It valued cleanliness, but did not possess modern convenience. It praised beauty as if it were natural, while building routines meant to guide, edit, and quietly correct nature at every turn. It treated the body as a moral surface, a social message, a medical problem, and an object of desire all at once. No wonder the habits became strange. Beauty was being asked to do too many jobs at the same time. And yet that is exactly what beauty has always been asked to do, only with different ingredients and different excuses. What makes this so moving, perhaps, is how familiar the deeper wish remains beneath all the historical oddness. Medieval people wanted what people still want. They wanted to look fresher, younger, healthier, cleaner, softer, more attractive, more admired, and more safely placed within the judgments of others. They wanted the face to help them. They wanted the body to cooperate. They wanted to be seen favourably in a world that could be rough, watchful, and quick to decide what sort of person stood before it. The recipes may have changed, the insecurity has not. And so the weirdest medieval beauty habit of all may simply be this. People believed the body could be persuaded. With enough care, enough cloth, enough herbs, enough combing, enough washing, enough arranging, enough hope, perhaps the face would look kinder, the hair would fall better, the skin would calm, the breath would improve, and the visible self would move a little closer to the person one wished to be. That belief was not foolish, it was human, it still is. If you stayed with me until the end, I hope this journey through medieval beauty gave the past a little more texture, oddness, and humanity. Not just the strange remedies, but the desire behind them, to look fresher, softer, younger, more admired, and a little more protected from the roughness of ordinary life. And now, let the mirrors go dark, let the candles burn low, and let the last quiet rituals of the medieval night fade softly into the dark. Good night.